The first time Celeste Arlen laughed at Wade Calloway, she was standing beneath the glass-domed ceiling of the Beaumont House Hotel in Nashville with two private security men at her back, a national business network setting up cameras upstairs, and a room full of investors waiting to hear why her firm's newest acquisition would change the future of hospital logistics in America. Wade stood near the side entrance of the Magnolia Ballroom in faded charcoal coveralls, one knee marked with dust from the service corridor, a heavy key ring clipped to his belt, and a toolbox in his left hand that looked older than some of the young analysts moving around the room with tablets. Celeste had built Arlen Ridge Capital by making fast judgments. She could read weakness in a handshake, vanity in a boardroom smile, panic in the way a founder over-explained a revenue chart. That talent had made her feared, wealthy, and dangerously sure of herself. So when her lead bodyguard, Mason Creed, glanced toward the private stage entrance and asked why hotel maintenance was stationed so close to her movement route, Celeste looked at Wade the way a woman looks at a chair left in the wrong place. "I assume he knows where the breaker box is?" she said, her voice smooth enough to make the insult sound almost expensive. "But I sincerely hope he isn't part of the security plan." A few people heard it. Mason's mouth tightened into something almost like a smile. A junior event coordinator suddenly became fascinated by the carpet. Wade heard every word, but he only checked the latch on the access panel, wrote a voltage reading on his clipboard, and looked past Celeste toward the west side of the ballroom, where a man in a white banquet jacket had been standing too still since before breakfast. That morning had started in darkness, as most of Wade's mornings did. He arrived at the Beaumont House at 5:18, long before guests came down for coffee, and long before the lobby pianist took his place beneath the staircase. Nashville was damp from an overnight storm, the streets reflecting red traffic lights and neon honky-tonk signs in thin, trembling lines, and Wade sat in his old green Ford outside the employee entrance for half a minute before going in, listening to the heater tick and watching steam rise from the hotel laundry vents. He was 49 years old, though people often guessed older because grief and restraint had a way of settling into a man's face even when he still had strength in his shoulders. His daughter, Maribel, was 20 and studying respiratory therapy in Chattanooga, which meant he spent most evenings pretending not to worry about tuition, her car's transmission, her working late shifts at a grocery store, and the way she had inherited her mother's habit of saying "I'm fine" when she was anything but. Wade had raised her mostly alone since she was 16, not because her mother had died, and not because anybody had stopped loving anybody, but because some injuries divide a house without raising their voice. He did not talk about that at work. He did not talk about the life before Beaumont House either, the years when he wore tailored suits over body armor, moved through airports with men who knew how to cover doors without appearing to look at them, and served as lead protection specialist for private clients whose names belonged on buildings, lawsuits, and federal watch briefings. At the Beaumont, he repaired old plumbing, adjusted ballroom lighting, replaced damaged tile, reset elevator relays, and carried a radio that mostly crackled with requests about ice machines. It was quieter that way. Quiet had become the only luxury Wade trusted. The hotel suited him because old buildings did not pretend to be simple. The Beaumont House had opened in 1911, when the city was smaller and men with tobacco money believed marble could make their names permanent. It had a grand staircase that creaked in one place no carpenter had ever fully corrected, a service elevator that sighed before dropping 2 inches at the 3rd floor, a copper roof that ticked during temperature changes, and ballroom wiring updated so many times the diagrams looked less like engineering records than family secrets. Wade knew these moods the way another man might know bird calls. A door that dragged only when humidity rose above 70%. A pipe that hummed when the north boilers were working too hard. A security camera that should have shown the entire west corridor, but If nudged 3 inches, left a narrow, blind wedge near the stage entrance. His supervisor, Everett Shaw, understood Wade better than most, though he did not press for details. Everett had run hotel security for 32 years and had the tired, observant kindness of a man who had seen congressmen vomit in planters, famous singers cry in freight elevators, and billionaires lose wedding rings in laundry bags. He recognized Wade's old training during Wade's second week on the job, not from anything Wade said, but from the way he entered rooms. "You used to do something else," Everett had said one morning in the maintenance shop, pouring burnt coffee into a styrofoam cup. Wade had looked at him, not hostile, just closed. "Everybody used to do something else." Everett had accepted that answer and never asked again. By 6:10, Wade was in the Magnolia Ballroom, checking the emergency lighting relays before the production crews arrived. The ballroom had cream walls, dark walnut columns, hand-cut chandeliers, and tall arched windows looking down toward Union Street. Arlen Ridge Capital had rented the entire second-floor event level for a launch presentation tied to its newly acquired medical supply software company, a firm Celeste planned to present as the missing link between rural hospitals and national distribution networks. Wade did not care about acquisition language, but he cared about power load, exit access, camera angles, and how many people would be packed into the room if the system failed. 400 guests were expected: investors, state officials, hospital administrators, press, and the kind of consultants who looked young enough to have been born with calendar invites in their hands. The first strange thing Wade noticed was the west camera. It was not broken, but its angle was wrong by just enough to matter. He put 2 fingers on the mount, looked along the sight line, and saw the sliver of corridor it no longer covered. The second thing was a service door near the catering prep area, held open with a folded cardboard coffee sleeve. It could have been laziness. It often was. He removed it, checked the latch, and put the sleeve in his pocket. The third thing was the banquet worker near the third walnut column from the stage. A man in a white jacket and black tie, early 40s, narrow face, dark hair combed too neatly, shoes polished but not soft-soled like the rest of the catering crew. He had a folded napkin over one arm and no tray, no cart, no visible purpose. He looked at the stage, then at the left lighting junction, then back to the stage. Wade marked him in his mind and bent again over the panel. Around 7:30, his co-worker Hal Mercer rolled in with a cart full of replacement bulbs and a paper bag of sausage biscuits, humming something off-key. Hal was 63, broad through the middle, cheerful in the stubborn way of men who had survived enough hardship to stop granting it authority over breakfast. He had been at Beaumont House for 14 years and treated every major corporate event as a temporary illness the hotel would recover from by midnight. "You got that look," Hal said, stopping beside the panel. Wade did not look up. "My face is just arranged this way." "No, sir. You've got the look you get when somebody left a problem standing upright and called it staff." Wade wrote down a reading. Hal followed his eyes toward the banquet worker. "Temp crew came in early. Big money crowd likes big money shrimp." "Maybe." Hal tore a biscuit in half and offered one. Wade shook his head. "You want me to ask Everett to run him?" "Not yet." Hal studied him for another second, his easy humor dimming. Most of the maintenance staff had theories about Wade. Former cop, former Marine, former boxer. One housekeeper swore he had been in witness protection because no man could be that calm around angry guests unless the government had taught him fear management. Wade let them speculate. Speculation required less of him than truth. Hal finally sighed and said, "Well, if you start moving fast, I'm moving slow in the opposite direction." Wade almost smiled. "That's probably wise." Celeste's convoy arrived at 10:46, four black SUVs sliding beneath the hotel canopy with the controlled spacing of people who practiced being important. Wade saw them through the ballroom windows while testing the relay under load. The front vehicle stopped first, the rear vehicle angled slightly outward, and Mason Creed stepped from the second SUV before Celeste's door opened. Mason was good. Wade recognized it immediately and without resentment. He was 6'3", broad without stiffness, gray suit cut to hide equipment, left hand free, eyes moving through glass, valet stand, lobby entrance, upper balcony, street reflection. Not flashy, not lazy, a professional who had likely built his confidence honestly. That made what he missed more dangerous, not less. Celeste emerged in a slate blue suit with a white silk blouse and a single emerald pin at her lapel. She was 54, with silver blonde hair cut clean at her jaw and a face whose beauty had sharpened instead of softened with age. Her assistant, Naomi Bell, moved one pace behind with a tablet, two phones, and the expression of a woman who solved problems before anyone else was allowed to describe them. Celeste did not ignore hotel staff rudely, exactly. She ignored them completely, which felt colder. The doorman greeted her. The front desk manager welcomed her. A young bellman stepped aside with nervous precision. Celeste's eyes moved through them as if they were part of the woodwork, useful only if broken. The ballroom tightened when she entered, not physically, though the room was suddenly full of more people, but emotionally. Celeste carried pressure the way some women carried perfume. Conversation shortened. Technicians stood straighter. Arlen Ridge employees began speaking in crisp half-sentences. Naomi checked the stage schedule, the teleprompter, the seating chart, the press riser, the investor packet table, and the live stream angles with a speed that would have been impressive if it had not seemed so punishing. Mason walked Celeste's route with two other security men, confirming the main public entrance, the private holding room behind the stage, the service corridor, and the emergency stairs. Wade watched from the panel, appearing to adjust a wiring cover while noting Mason's choices. The stage-right approach was clean and conventional. The left corridor, near the lighting junction, was less protected because it belonged to hotel operations, and people with money often believed service spaces became safe when ignored. The man in the banquet jacket had moved closer to that junction. When Celeste passed near him, every other service worker subtly straightened or stepped back. He did neither. His shoulders lowered, his jaw set. His weight shifted to the ball of his right foot. Wade felt an old door open inside him, one he had tried for 3 years to keep closed. He did not feel panic. Panic was noisy. What he felt was colder and worse. Recognition. The insult happened after a simple accident made Wade visible. A young event runner, red-faced and sweating under the pressure of Naomi's schedule, backed a rolling stand of stage uplights into Wade's toolbox. The box tipped, struck the marble with a flat crack, and spilled tools across the floor. Pliers, meter leads, an adjustable wrench, a roll of electrical tape, a screwdriver with a worn yellow handle, a flashlight dented near the lens. Heads turned. The runner began apologizing too quickly, nearly kneeling in his embarrassment. Wade lifted one hand, calm and low, telling him without words not to make the moment larger. He crouched and collected each tool in its proper place. He could feel Celeste looking at him the way a person feels a draft under a closed door. When he glanced up, she stood 10 feet away with Mason beside her. Irritation resting lightly on her face, as if the scattered tools confirmed some suspicion she already had about old hotels and ordinary workers. Wade closed the box and returned to the panel. He had endured worse than contempt. The body survived contempt easily. Pride sometimes took longer, but Wade had learned not to leave pride lying around where strangers could step on it. Still, He was not made of stone. When Celeste made her comment a short while later, when she looked at his coveralls and decided in front of a room that he could not possibly understand danger because he carried a toolbox instead of a weapon, something in him tightened, not with rage, but with tiredness. It was exhausting, being underestimated by people who depended on things they refused to see. After Celeste moved on, Wade finished the panel check with the same precision he would have used if no one had spoken. Voltage stabilized. The backup circuit held under full lighting load. He logged the result, closed the access door, and knew his assigned work was technically done. He should have returned to the maintenance shop. He should have let Everett handle security, let Mason handle Celeste, let Arlen Ridge and its money fill the ballroom with the safe confidence of people who believed danger announced itself to the properly titled. Instead, Wade picked up his toolbox and moved along the perimeter of the room, staying in the narrow shadow between draped walls and service stations. The banquet worker had moved again. 4 times now. Once to the press riser without delivering anything. Once to the west wall cable trough, where he bent as if checking something, but touched nothing. Once near the 3rd walnut column, where he watched the podium. Now he stood near the lighting junction, holding a tray with no weight on it, his eyes moving in a repeated pattern. Podium, Mason, left corridor, podium. Every 15 or 20 minutes, his right hand went to the small of his back, not scratching, not adjusting clothing, but verifying position. Wade had seen men touch concealed weapons that way in hotel kitchens, courthouse hallways, private elevators, and once in a church basement where a senator's brother had insisted security would be bad optics. He pressed his radio. Everett, Callaway, static. Go ahead. I need a second verification on banquet staff, west side, white jacket, black tie, dark hair, polished hard-sole shoes, positioned near the left lighting junction. He doesn't match service pattern. Everett did not answer immediately. In the background, Wade heard overlapping voices, a request about police parking, somebody asking where press credentials should be staged. Catering roster cleared at the dock, Everett said at last. Badges were checked. Check this one again. Is it concrete? Wade watched the man's hand flick to his back once more. Not yet. Everett exhaled, and Wade could hear the strain of too much happening at once. Stay close, but don't freelance unless you have to. I'll send Luis when he's free. The channel clicked. Wade lowered the radio. Don't freelance unless you have to. The phrase landed with an old familiar weight. Most rules were written for days when there was still time to obey them. Celeste stepped onto the stage at 12:28 for her microphone check. The ballroom had become a controlled storm. Florists trimmed stems into silver buckets. Audio technicians called numbers into headsets. Hotel servers aligned water glasses. Arlen Ridge staff placed investor folders on chairs. Camera operators adjusted tripods. Naomi stood in the wings with her tablet, moving through timing notes while speaking softly into an earpiece. Mason stood at the base of the stage on Celeste's right, exactly where the plan put him, covering the most obvious approach. The banquet worker drifted left near the junction box and the blind wedge created by the shifted camera. He was now 12 feet from the stage steps, 8 feet from the service corridor, and close enough to reach Celeste during a lighting drop if everyone looked up at once. Wade crossed the room. He did not run. Running changes a room before it solves the problem. He set his toolbox down beside a service table, approached from the man's left and stopped at conversational distance. I need to see your badge, he said, low and flat. The man turned. His eyes moved over Wade's coveralls, tool belt, empty hands, distance to Mason, distance to the stage. For a fraction of a second, Wade saw calculation. Then the calculation ended. The right hand went behind his back. Wade was already moving before the blade appeared. He stepped off the line, dropped his center, and turned his torso so the man's first angle had nowhere useful to land. The weapon was a short, fixed blade with a dark handle, slim enough to conceal, ugly in its practicality. Mason saw steel and came hard from stage right. He moved with real speed, committed and protective, exactly the way a good bodyguard moves when the principal is exposed. But in the half-second he read the picture wrong. He saw a maintenance man within arm's reach of the attacker and processed Wade as an obstacle, maybe even part of the danger. Mason hit him from the left with a shoulder drive meant to clear him from the line. Wade accepted the impact instead of fighting it. He rotated with Mason's momentum, stepped through the force, caught Mason's wrist, and folded it into a lock so clean and complete that Mason's whole body stopped as if the marble had risen around his shoes. Mason's eyes widened. He could not advance, could not pull back, could not free himself without breaking his own wrist. Wade released him before injury became necessary, guided him 2 steps aside, and moved into the attacker's space in the same breath. His left hand took the knife wrist and rotated down. The blade struck the marble with a sharp metallic click. His right elbow pressed into the nerve pocket below the collarbone. The attacker's knees failed. He dropped first to one knee, then both, face white with shock, mind awake and body temporarily unwilling to serve it. The entire thing lasted less than 4 seconds. Afterward, the ballroom fell into a silence so complete Wade could hear the faint buzz of the podium microphone. Celeste stood frozen at center stage, one hand still resting on the lectern, the polished certainty gone from her face as if a curtain had been pulled away. Naomi's tablet lay on the stage carpet where she had dropped it. A florist near the east wall held a stem of white lilies in midair. Mason sat on the floor with one hand braced behind him, staring at his own wrist, then at Wade, with the stunned expression of a man whose professional beliefs had just been corrected faster than pride could defend them. Wade stepped back from the kneeling attacker and did not touch the knife. Evidence mattered. Distance mattered. Breathing mattered. "Everett," he said into the radio, his voice steady enough to wake the room. "Magnolia Ballroom. Weapon down. Suspect controlled. Lock West Service Corridor and call Metro Police." Everett's reply came sharp and immediate. "On it!" The attacker tried to shift his weight. Wade looked down once. "Don't." The man stopped. No one mistook the quiet for weakness this time. Police arrived in 7 minutes because officers were already staged outside for traffic control and VIP movement. The attacker's catering badge fell apart under inspection almost immediately. His name was Adrian Pell, a former founder of a medical routing startup that Arlen Ridge had acquired, reorganized, and effectively dismantled 2 years earlier after a bitter lawsuit Adrian had lost in public and in court. The truth, once detectives began pulling it together, had the grim patience of obsession. False credentials, a stolen banquet jacket, an altered camera angle, a wedged service door, a concealed blade carried through a weak inspection point, a plan built around Celeste standing alone at the podium during a lighting transition while Mason watched the wrong corridor. He had not come to disrupt a launch. He had come to make his grievance permanent. The ballroom was sealed. The event was postponed until the following day. Guests were held downstairs and fed calm language by Arlen Ridge's communications team. Vendors were moved into corridors. Hotel staff gave statements. Celeste sat in a front-row chair with untouched coffee cooling beside her, looking at the stage where she had nearly died and at the maintenance man who had noticed the shape of it before anyone else cared to look. Wade gave his statement plainly. He described the camera, the door wedge, the abnormal positioning, the shoes, the repeated hand movement, the posture change when Celeste approached, his radio call to Everett, his approach, the weapon draw, Mason's collision, the disarm, and the control hold. He did not embellish. He did not seek credit. He did not mention Celeste's earlier insult because it had no relevance to the sequence of threat. The officer taking notes paused when Wade described reporting the concern before the incident. "You called it in earlier?" "Yes." "How long before contact?" Wade considered the timeline. 40 to 45 minutes. The officer wrote that down. Everett stood nearby, his face heavier than usual. Good men failed too, sometimes because the day got loud and the warning arrived without a badge that made it easy to prioritize. Celeste heard the answer. 45 minutes. He had seen it. He had said it. She had laughed at him while the danger he named was still standing in the room, dressed like service. When the officer finished, Wade picked up his toolbox and turned toward the service exit. He wanted the basement, a sink, quiet, the plain relief of a task with screws and measurements instead of eyes. "Mr. Calloway." Celeste's voice stopped him before he reached the door. It was the first time she had used his name. Maybe someone had told her. Maybe she had finally looked at the patch on his chest. Wade turned. Celeste walked toward him across the half-empty ballroom, Mason and Naomi watching from near the stage. She stopped several feet away this time, leaving enough space to show she had learned at least one small thing. For a moment, she looked like a woman standing in a room she had paid for and only now understood she had never truly entered. "When did you first notice him?" she asked. "Around 7. Her face changed. "This morning?" "Yes." "You watched him all morning?" "I watched him and reported him." The sentence was not sharpened, but it cut anyway because truth did not need decoration when someone had been avoiding it. Celeste looked down once, then back at him. "I owe you an apology." Wade waited. She seemed unused to the position but determined not to escape it. "I looked at your uniform and decided I knew what you were capable of. I mocked you in front of my people and yours. I made Mason part of it by making my contempt feel like permission." Mason's jaw tightened, but he did not look away. Celeste continued. "That was arrogant. It was wrong. And today it nearly made me blind to the only person in the room who was actually seeing." Wade held her gaze. He did not rescue her from discomfort. He had spent too many years watching powerful people turn apology into a performance and then expect applause. "I appreciate the apology," he said. "That's all?" she asked, not offended, almost uncertain. "That's all I have for it." He nodded once and went through the service door. By evening, Celeste was not thinking about the launch deck, though Naomi had already rebuilt the schedule with the ruthless competence that had kept Arlen Ridge functioning through lawsuits, acquisitions, hostile press, and one attempted shareholder revolt. Celeste sat in the Beaumont House Business Center at 8:30, jacket folded over a chair, reading everything Naomi and Mason could find about Wade Calloway. There was little, which told its own story. People who wanted recognition left trails. People who wanted peace learned how to stop being searchable. Mason found the professional outline through old contacts. Wade had spent 11 years with Rourke Atlas Protective Services, a private security firm so selective that its name rarely appeared in public contracts, and still carried weight in rooms where serious close protection people spoke honestly. Rourke Atlas recruited from special operations, federal protective details, intelligence security branches, and a handful of civilians who had proved under pressure that they could make decisions inside the space between one heartbeat and the next. Mason had attended a 3-day course taught by a former Rourke Atlas instructor in Virginia 6 years earlier. He still practiced 2 drills from that course every week. He wasn't just on a team, Mason said from the doorway, his taped wrist held close to his body. He led one. High-value financial principles, overseas movements, hostile environments, litigation threats, the kind of work people pretend bodyguards do until they see what it actually requires. Celeste looked at him. "And what he did to you?" Mason gave a small, humorless smile. That was him being careful with me. Naomi found the other piece near 10 o'clock, a partially sealed court filing tied to a private donor event in Chicago 3 years earlier. The public record described an attempted assault outside a charity reception, neutralized without injury to the protected principal. The security lead resigned the same week. Names were sealed, but dates and contract references matched Rourke Atlas. Celeste called Everett to the business center and asked him directly. Everett stood with his hands folded around his cap, looking older than he had that morning. "He didn't come here to be found," Everett said. Celeste waited. Everett told the story carefully, the way decent people handle another person's wound. Wade had been working protection at the Chicago event. His wife Lillian had come by near the end of the evening to meet him for a late dinner. She was not part of the protected party, not part of the movement plan, not anyone's assignment. During a transfer between exits, a secondary aggressor came through a service passage that should have been cleared. Wade was 20 feet away, exactly where his training required him to be, covering the principal's movement. Lillian stepped into the wrong gap at the wrong second and took the attack meant to create chaos. She survived, but survival was not the same as restoration. There were surgeries, months of rehabilitation, pain that turned sleep into work, and guilt that had nowhere clean to land because Wade had done his job and still failed the person he loved most. "They tried to stay married," Everett said quietly. "I think they were kind to each other about it, which might have made it harder. She moved to Kentucky to be near her sister. Their daughter stayed with him to finish school. A few months later, he came here asking for maintenance. Not security, maintenance." Everett looked at Celeste then, with respect but no softness. "I gave it to him because I understood that sometimes a man isn't looking for a smaller job. He's looking for a life that doesn't keep asking him to bleed in the same place." After Everett left, Celeste remained in the business center with the lights too bright and the printer humming in the corner. She thought of Wade kneeling to gather his tools while she looked at him like clutter. She thought of the insults she had delivered with perfect diction. She thought of the fact that he had seen Adrian Pell at 7 in the morning and watched him for hours while everyone else built a stage around danger. Celeste had spent 25 years rewarding herself for swift assessment. In finance, hesitation could cost millions. In negotiations, kindness shown too early could be read as weakness. She had trained herself to sort people quickly. Threat, asset, obstacle, leverage, noise. The system worked often enough to make her trust it everywhere. That was the danger. A talent used outside its proper field became a flaw wearing a medal. Mason returned near midnight, his tie loosened, his pride bruised in a way he seemed honest enough to examine. "I keep replaying it," he said. Celeste looked up. "The takedown?" "The first half second. I moved fast and wrong. He moved late and right." "Late?" Mason shook his head. "No. That's what bothers me. He wasn't late. He was waiting until the moment required action. I was reacting to what I saw. He was acting on what he knew." He looked toward the dark window. "Yesterday I would have called that hesitation. And now? Now I think it's discipline." Celeste said nothing. The words sat between them like a verdict. The next morning, Wade was in the sub-basement mechanical corridor at 7:12, crouched beside the main air handler with a flashlight between his teeth and a pressure gauge in one hand. The corridor was warm, loud, and painted in layers of old institutional beige. Pipes ran overhead with faded labels. Condensation gathered near a floor drain. It was exactly the sort of place important guests never imagined existed, though their comfort depended on it every minute. Mason came down the metal stairs alone. Wade heard the unevenness in his step before he saw him, a slight guarding from the fall. Mason stopped a few feet away and waited until Wade finished noting the pressure reading. Then he extended his hand. Wade stood, wiped his palm on a rag, and took it. The handshake was firm, brief and without theater. "You could have broken my wrist," Mason said. "Yes. You didn't. You were doing your job." Mason nodded once. "Badly." "Wrongly," Wade said. "Not badly. There's a difference." Mason absorbed that. "Rourke Atlas?" Wade looked at him for a long second. "A while ago." "Lead team?" Wade turned back to the gauge. Mason accepted the silence. Some answers were not owed simply because a man had earned respect. At the stairs, Mason paused. "Mr. Calloway." Wade glanced up. "Thank you for correcting me without humiliating me." Wade tightened the valve. "Humiliation teaches less than people think." Mason stood there another second, then went upstairs. The launch resumed at 2 o'clock with tighter security, less arrogance, and a ballroom full of people who knew only the polished version of what had happened the day before. The police report called it an attempted assault by an unauthorized individual. The press release called it an isolated security breach resolved through coordination between hotel staff and private security. Wade's name was not in either. He had asked Everett to keep it that way, and Everett had honored it. Celeste stood at the podium under bright lights, her prepared remarks glowing on the teleprompter to the left. Naomi had written a strong opening about resilience, confidence, and strategic continuity. Celeste read the first line silently, then did not use it. She placed both hands on the sides of the podium and looked out at investors, analysts, reporters, civic leaders, and hospital executives waiting for the usual language of certainty. "Most of my career has rewarded me for judging quickly," she said. "That skill has helped me make decisions in difficult rooms, under pressure, with consequences attached. But yesterday reminded me that speed is not the same as wisdom, and confidence is not the same as sight." The room stilled. Naomi looked up from the wings. Mason shifted slightly at stage left, where he had repositioned himself after studying the room again. Celeste continued, "The most important person in a room is not always the person with the title, the microphone, or the most expensive suit. Sometimes the person seeing most clearly is the person everyone else has trained themselves to look through." She did not name Wade. She had learned enough not to turn his privacy into her redemption. She moved on to the launch, and she delivered it well, but differently than she would have the day before. Less like a woman conquering a room. More like a woman finally standing inside one. Wade did not hear the speech clearly. He was on the 5th floor repairing a damaged window latch in room 512, where a guest had tried to force the sash open with the kind of determination that made hotel maintenance believe strongly in human foolishness. Applause rose through the old bones of the building in muffled waves, present but distant, like weather behind thick glass. His phone buzzed while he was brushing metal shavings from the sill. Unknown number. He opened the message and stood by the window overlooking downtown. "Mr. Calloway, I will not use your story as proof that I learned something, because that would be another way of taking what is not mine. But I did learn something. Thank you for what you saw, what you did, and what you declined to perform afterward. Celeste Arlen." Wade read it twice. Then he locked the phone and looked down at the street, where buses moved through afternoon traffic and tourists drifted toward Broadway, laughing under umbrellas. For a moment he thought of Lillian, as he still did when the old life brushed too close to the new one. He remembered her in the hospital, pale but alive, her hand in his, both of them trying to be brave for the other until bravery became another wall between them. He remembered Maribel at 16, standing in their kitchen after Lillian moved out, asking whether the family was broken forever or just broken for now. He had not known how to answer then. He still did not fully. Some questions did not resolve. They simply became part of the house a person lived in. That evening, after the launch had ended and guests had begun moving toward cocktail receptions, Wade found 3 missed calls from Maribel. That tightened his chest faster than any ballroom threat. He called back from the employee stairwell. She answered on the first ring. Are you actually fine, or are you saying fine like a dad who thinks details are illegal? Wade leaned against the painted concrete wall and closed his eyes. Actually fine. Because I saw something online about an incident at your hotel, and then Mom texted me, and when Mom uses punctuation in a text, I know it's serious. Wade smiled, despite himself. Lillian's texts were usually gentle fragments. Punctuation meant alarm. No injuries, he said. Were you near it? He could have lied. He had lied before by giving smaller truths, the kind meant to protect her but often leaving her alone with imagination. Yes. Silence. Then Maribel's voice came softer. Dad, I'm all right. I don't need you to be a hero. The words reached him in a place he tried to keep covered. I know. Do you? He looked down at his rough hand, the scar along his thumb from a training blade 20 years earlier, the small burn mark from a boiler repair last winter. I'm trying, she exhaled shakily. They talked for 20 minutes after that, about her clinical rotation, about a professor who graded like mercy was illegal, about a used Honda she wanted him to inspect, about whether she should visit Lillian over spring break. Near the end, Maribel said, Mom told me once that you always think if you stand in the right place, nothing bad can happen. Wade swallowed. Your mom is usually right. But you know that's not how life works, right? He looked toward the stairwell door, hearing distant applause below. I'm learning. Weeks passed, and the public story faded into the smooth language institutions prefer. Unauthorized individual detained. Event rescheduled successfully. No injuries. Strong market response. Arlen Ridge's launch made financial news for 2 days, then disappeared beneath other mergers, other scandals, other confident people standing behind other podiums. Inside the Beaumont house, however, the story did not vanish. It changed the building in quiet ways. Everett no longer let the words "not concrete" delay a second look. A warning from housekeeping received the same first respect as a warning from private security. Catering badges were checked twice for major events, then randomly once more because routine was most dangerous when it became predictable. Mason returned 3 times before dawn, not with Celeste, but alone, meeting Wade in an unused service corridor where the carpet was worn and the lights hummed. He did not ask to be taught tricks. He asked to understand what he had missed. Wade respected that. Pride that could kneel became discipline. They worked footwork, distance, room reading, pressure without panic, and the difference between moving first and moving correctly. Mason was strong, skilled, and serious, but the best thing about him was that he no longer needed to be the best man in the room in order to learn from one. Hal saw him leaving one morning and nearly choked on his coffee. That expensive suit coming down here for plumbing lessons? He asked. Wade hung a wrench on the pegboard. Something like that. Hal squinted. You're the strangest maintenance man God ever wired together. Probably not the strangest. Top 5. Easy. Celeste changed too, though not in ways that would have satisfied a sentimental movie. She did not become soft overnight. She did not start hugging receptionists or pretending hierarchy no longer existed. She remained demanding, exacting, and capable of frightening senior executives with silence. But she began to pause before deciding which people in a room mattered. At Arlen Ridge, she required post-acquisition site reviews to include interviews with warehouse leads, night shift supervisors, drivers, dispatchers, and technicians, not as a public relations gesture, but as risk assessment. When a hospital distribution manager in rural Mississippi warned that Arlen Ridge's new routing software would fail during storm outages because it assumed cell coverage the county did not have, Celeste listened instead of letting a vice president summarize the concern into irrelevance. That warning saved the company from a launch failure 3 months later. She sent the manager a handwritten note and made sure his name stayed on the corrective proposal. Naomi noticed the pattern and, after years of translating Celeste's instincts into action, quietly approved. Mason noticed it too. "You look at doormen now," he said one evening after a board dinner in Atlanta. Celeste glanced at him. "I always looked at doormen." "No," Mason said. "You looked near them." She did not answer, which in Celeste's language meant he had landed the point. In late January, Celeste returned to Beaumont House for a private dinner with hospital executives. No launch stage, no television crew, no grand investor theater. Her convoy was smaller this time, though Mason still came because humility did not make the world harmless. Wade was kneeling near the lobby fireplace, repairing a loose brass vent cover that rattled whenever the HVAC kicked on. The lobby smelled of cedar garland, polished stone, and coffee from the bar. Celeste entered through the revolving doors and saw him before anyone pointed him out. More importantly, she stopped. She waited until he finished setting the screw, then said, "Good evening, Mr. Calloway." The front desk clerk glanced up, surprised by the respect in her tone. Wade stood, wiped one hand on a rag, and nodded. "Ms. Arlen." Mason gave him a small nod, not subordinate, not equal exactly, but professional and grateful. Celeste did not make a speech. She did not mention the incident. She did not try to display her growth for the lobby. She simply looked at him as a person in the room, then moved on to greet the hotel manager. Wade watched her cross the lobby and noticed her eyes pause now on the doorman, the young concierge, the banquet captain checking the dinner list near the staircase. Not warmly, perhaps. Celeste Arlen was not built for easy warmth. But she saw them. That mattered more than theatrical kindness. After his shift, Wade stepped out through the employee entrance and found snow falling lightly into the alley, each flake turning silver beneath the loading dock lamp before vanishing on the wet pavement. He pulled his jacket tighter and stood for a moment beside his old Ford. The hotel hummed behind him, boilers ticking, laundry vents breathing, ballroom lights glowing through high windows. For years, Wade had believed he had only two choices: the old life, where he stood between danger and important people until one uncovered angle cost his family more than any client would ever understand, or the hidden life, where he made himself ordinary enough that no one would ask him to stand there again. But maybe there was a third life, one that did not require him to worship usefulness or disappear inside humility. A life where he could fix the thing in front of him, answer when the moment truly required him, and still come home as a father instead of a monument to other people's safety. His phone buzzed, a photo from Maribel, a practice exam score circled in red, higher than she expected, with the message, "Don't get emotional, old man." He smiled in the alley, alone under the snow, and typed back, "Too late." Then another message appeared, this one from Lillian. "Maribel told me about the hotel. I'm glad you're safe. I hope you know that what happened to us was never because you didn't love us enough." Wade stared at the words until the cold reached his fingers. For 3 years he had carried a sentence inside him that no one else had spoken, but that he had believed anyway. If I had been better, she would not have been hurt. Lillian's message did not erase it. Nothing that deep disappeared because a phone lit up in the snow, but it loosened something. It let a little air into a sealed room. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he got into the truck, started the engine, and let the heater blow lukewarm air against the windshield while the hotel blurred behind falling snow. He thought of Celeste's first laugh and her second apology, of Mason's outstretched hand, of Everett's quiet guilt, of Hal's jokes, of Maribel's fear, of Lillian's grace arriving late, but not too late to matter. The world had underestimated him many times, but Wade understood now that the deepest wound had not been strangers mistaking his uniform for his worth. It had been the fear that, after everything, he had mistaken his own failure for his identity. He was not the worst second of his life. He was not the job he left or the coveralls he wore. He was a father who paid tuition in overtime hours, a maintenance man who knew the language of old buildings, a former protector who had learned the cost of believing any plan could make love safe, and a man still capable of standing in the right place without needing applause afterward. He typed Lillian back at last. "I'm learning that. Thank you." Then he put the phone down and drove home through the quiet streets of Nashville, past closed bars and glowing church windows, past delivery trucks and sleeping storefronts, while behind him the Beaumont house kept breathing in the cold. People would sleep safely there that night without knowing his name. Once, that might have hurt him. Now it felt almost peaceful. Dignity did not always arrive with recognition. Sometimes it was only the steady knowledge that when everyone else looked through the room and missed what mattered, he had seen clearly, acted carefully, and remained whole enough to go home. Sometimes the greatest heroes in life are not the ones standing under bright lights, wearing expensive suits, or speaking from a stage. Sometimes they are the quiet people in the corner, the ones carrying a toolbox, fixing what others never notice, and protecting everyone without asking to be seen. Wade's story reminds us that dignity does not need applause, and true worth is never measured by a uniform, a job title, or the way the world chooses to look at us. Celeste nearly lost everything because she judged too quickly, but she gained something more valuable than power: the humility to finally see another human being clearly. In our own lives, we may also overlook the people who hold things together, the parents who sacrifice silently, the workers who keep going, the wounded souls who still choose kindness. This story teaches us to slow down, look deeper, and respect people before life forces us to learn that lesson the hard way. So tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated, or have you ever realized you judged someone too soon? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more emotional stories about courage, dignity, and the quiet strength that changes lives.